Welcome everyone to our second topic in this series where we are going to be looking at objections pertaining to the idea that no gods exist. In today's video we are going to be looking at the problem of beauty. So again, I'm going to go over what I mean by atheism here. I know a lot of atheists believe that atheism is all about the lack of belief in God or gods, but whether or not you agree with me, I'm going to be defining atheism as the claim that no gods exist in reality. There is a difference between a claim and a belief, so just because you're an atheist doesn't mean you fully accept the claim of atheism. But I think it would be fair to say you lean more to that end. So whether or not you like my definition, this series will be addressing and critiquing the claim that no gods exist. Alright, so before we state what the problem is, let's go over the 2 points we're going to be covering. And to start, we have the viewpoint that beauty is objective. This means that beauty is found in properties of the object in itself. And I'm defining objects very loosely here for this video. I know some of you guys think, if I bring up the word object, like I'm talking about like a cube or something. But an object in this case is a lot more broad, and it could mean like a view of the earth, a song, etc. So pretty much back to this. A very important point here, which is a place I see many people get confused with, is that in both scenarios we are not concerned with the arrow shown in this diagram or our experience. We are concerned with what is actually causing this experience or where the cause lies. Now I know that the first thought of some of you, especially atheists out there, might have this theory that everything must generate from our brains. But picture hearing a train horn. In this case, it's not our brains causing the sound. Even if you believe all our experiences dependent on the brain, when it comes to the train horn, something had to cause those brain waves to occur in the first place. So the objectivists pretty much see beauty in a similar way, where we're almost like experiencing beauty from that object. And the other viewpoint we're going to be looking at is subjective beauty, which in this case means that the object doesn't really have beauty in itself, but instead is entirely dependent on our brains and how our brains have been formed. So in this case, when you see an object, again loosely defined, and experience a sort of beauty from it, it's actually not because of the object, but instead due to your brain liking this object, which can be similar and different from person to person. And there you have kind of what I'm explaining there with what we experience from it. Alright, so we're going to start this off with a little bit of a thought experiment to not only kind of see how both would respond, but to kind of set up our argument here to begin with. So this thought experiment is a pretty common one that happens maybe not every day, but very much close to that. And that is driving down a road and just noticing like just a good view. It could be nature or something, but just noticing a good view when normally you really don't think much of it. This doesn't have to be driving, it just be like walking somewhere. Even this picture I have right here is actually a place where in my real life where I drive down a decent amount. But like the day I took this picture, I actually noticed how beautiful it was. And so how do these two worldviews respond? Or maybe not worldviews, but views of beauty respond? Because you might think that the objectivists have a little bit of an issue with this, as it seems like the experience is changing. But so how will the objectivists respond? Well, they'll be saying that the beauty perceived, or what we experience, changes because focus was given to the view. And this seems to make a decent amount of sense, as we're looking at the view in this case, and we're like, when we add focus to it, it seems like we're actually able to experience more of what beauty this object has. So that seems like a pretty good argument. So how do the subjectivists respond? Well, the subjectivists say that we enjoy focusing on this view, as our brain will find things it likes about it. So pretty much we'll admit, yeah, we focus on it, but we're going to take a little bit of a step further and just say, like, we're only focusing on things that we like about it, though. That's just kind of how it works. Alright, so on to the topic of focus. We can see again how the objectivists could see as evidence for their claim, how when we put focus on some objects compared to others, we can find more qualities of beauty of it, which intuitively supports the idea that beauty is objective, as it seems we're experiencing beauty from the object, again loosely defined, and not the case that it's generative of our brains. And to say this point one more time, and also I just kind of want to give a musical suggestion, I have a challenge for you guys. I want you guys to listen to these two songs, Dance Monkey and VORVEL till I'm definitely just destroying the name there. It's definitely not that. I'll give a link to it in the comment section of both of them actually. Uh, but I want you to listen to these songs and not like be doing anything else in the background. Not singing along to it, nothing. I want you to just focus on the song itself. Also, I'm not asking the question, which song do you like more, but what song is more beautiful given from your intuitions? And I know the song to the right is in a different language, but this will also be a little more fodder to a point of me making later on. And hopefully you get the intuition that one song is obviously more beautiful than the other, regardless of how much you like it, which is a big point that I'm trying to make. Alright, so what are some takeaways from this so far? Well, when we look at something like focus, the objectivists will see it as we're focusing and due to the intrinsic properties of object like detail, cohesiveness, or certain patterns like symmetry, certain color combinations. That's where the beauty is coming from. So what about the subjectivists? Well, the examples we brought up earlier does bring up a problem that for some things humans can agree upon the beauty of the object when we put forth focus on it. Sometimes to the point where we could say we didn't even like it, but we have to admit it's beautiful. Another argument objectivists can bring up is the argument that detail and also a little bit on cohesiveness are actual viewable attributes not dependent on our brains. Which, yes, the subjectivist could say our brains likes things with more detail. But the objectivist would just be like, yeah, I agree with that, but why does it seem like some things have more detail? That seems like an objective quality. So we're giving the better explanation here. But anyway, we're going to not really focus on those arguments right now and give the subjectivist the benefit of the doubt here. So looking back on focus, we can see the subjectivists that these descriptors are pretty much dependent on conditions in our brain. So why we like some things or think that something's more beautiful than others are pretty much just dependent on the state of our brain. So what are these conditions here? Like, that's the question right there. Alright, so I think one thing that the subjectivists will obviously say here, and they might give like different words, but it all seems to add up to one thing, and that is experience. Now, culture, this is ways you can say like culture, upbringing, and how our brains have evolved. I'm adding that there as well because I feel like that's a pretty important part to the experience claim. We're all humans, so since we evolved from common ancestors, we're going to have to agree on some things. That's how it would work. So anyway, this is a very powerful argument because it's obviously a factor. I mean, you can't go from day to day and realize that some things that you believe wasn't dealt with your experience. That is obviously something that is the case. And even objectivists would even admit this. When it comes to the arrow, that the entire reason why the arrow isn't the exact same for everyone is because of experience. That is what the objectivists will admit. So the subjectivists seem to be having a pretty good argument so far. So pretty much what this goes with is that all these factors that have influenced you also shape your understanding of certain qualities like beauty. There's also some other ones that experience can deal with, but we're not going to be talking about those in this video. So, does this explain the reality we live in well? And I think on the surface, it seems like the answer is most definitely yes. And we're going to just pose a question here to give fodder to the subjectivists. So what do most, if not all, humans agree is a beautiful thing? And I think the right answer here would probably be nature. There's hardly anyone I would go to where I would show this beautiful view like on a mountaintop or something like that, and they'll be like, ugly. So why is this the case? And if you're to look at something like experience, it seems pretty obvious. Since we all came from common ancestors, and we all lived on this planet, we are bound to think that something like nature is beautiful. And It even seems like it's even a better explanation when we look at some other things. We have differing opinions on things that we wouldn't have had common ancestors for, like music or maybe certain culturally relative type things like evangelism. I mean, Christians see that as a beautiful thing. Atheists obviously do not. Agreeing with a kiss is another example. So taking both those combined seems like they have a pretty good argument here. And kind of more of the point, objects we evolved together with and having like a matching lineage, such as nature, the night sky, obviously, and each other, of course, even each other, we all perceive more in an objective lens, and things that are more like current and just more along the lines of we just, we were pretty much raised that way, definitely seem to differ a lot more. So, are there any problems with this condition? That's a pretty important question here. And I'm going to bring up the rings of Saturn, or just Saturn in general. If our sense of beauty is completely dependent on experience, then how is something like Saturn, nebulas, supernovas, or just pretty much anything that goes with space beautiful to us? Would you say the views of stars? The problem is that just because we have these stars in the night sky, which, of course, some are planets, they didn't have to be beautiful when we would get close-ups, and yet they are. Look at something else like the nebula on the right, the bottom right, which the effect of us seeing in detail is greatly diminished on our Earth. It doesn't have to be beautiful or more beautiful than what we saw on Earth when we get to a closer look of it, but it is. And this leads to the big problem, which is how we view some things in space as more beautiful than earthly views, which, if you're to look at it theoretically, this should be impossible if beauty is dependent on experience. And if you don't like my space example, then let's go in the opposite direction. So what is this that you're looking at here? And would you say you intuitively think that this is beautiful? Well, what you're looking at is actually a microscopic picture of a leaf. I know that's pretty hard to believe. Belief. I'm funny, but again, this is another problem that subjectivists have to face. If our perception of beauty is dependent on our experience, then how are these things we have never had the chance to experience in our evolutionary lives be so beautiful? I mean, we can't just like get a leaf and like look super close into it and be like, oh, I see that picture there. No, we only have very recently seen these pictures due to modern lenses and all that. So this is a big problem for the subjectivists, as it seems that even a very broad definition of experience doesn't seem to explain all of reality. Alright, so I'm going to also go over one more candidate here, which is survival. Now, I would say this is definitely a far worse candidate. I think even subjectivists would agree. But it's still an interesting viewpoint some people hold, so pretty much in this case, beauty would essentially be dependent on what benefits for our survival. And this is just more of a conclusion when you take neo-Darwinistic evolution to the extreme. And we're going to also just look at a little bit of fodder for this. So we see views of water or whatever. We think that is pretty beautiful. And that makes sense because water is a very important part of how we evolved. We all need water, so seeing it as beautiful makes complete sense. So how are we going to respond to this? Well, we could, of course, just bring up the rings of Saturn, as it seems like it has no survival implications on it, or the microscopic picture of the leaf, but I want to do something more direct here. Are you startled? This can be pretty intimidating at first glance, but when we take a closer look and focus on the lion, we start to notice its beautiful attributes. So now we are seeing the lion, which for a long time, if you haven't known, was a predator to the humans, and yet we still have the intuition of beauty with it. And again, I think this also brings up the point again of how our feelings don't always seem to dictate what is actually beautiful. The survival condition, I think, explains pretty well why we would initially be startled by the lion at first glance. But even with that more negative feeling, we still admit its beauty. That's just crazy to think of sometimes. So, are there any ways to say the subjectivist position here? And I think the first objection I'm going to be going with is what I like to call the space-type objection, which is pretty much starts with the premise that it is shown in our human history we've had the fascination with stars. And kind of the implication of this that I think a lot of people think is, what if we just hyped up space to where when we finally got these close-ups, I guess you could say, or these close-up images, we just overestimated the beauty of it. So we have no control over what we're viewing. We just have gradually evolved in a way where we just overestimate it. This is a pretty interesting objection, but first of all, I will say this doesn't explain the leaf picture anyway. And second of all, I think the better way of going for this is that um, I think it's not the best. I think the best response you can get at here is that hype doesn't always lead to an overestimation. In fact, more times than not, overhyping something could actually lead to disappointment. I mean, this just happens all the time in our regular day lives. You could picture a world where it turns out that what we see in the night sky is actually a layer of the Earth's atmosphere, only visible at night. So when we would zoom in, all you would see was these tiny specks of white get larger, and that's it. But we don't live in this world. We live in one where each speck of light yields something our intuitions say is more beautiful than even the night sky view. So I don't think this really is that great of an objection here. And here's this other one that I need to bring up here. Even though I don't think it necessarily is like going against like the evidence we brought here, I think this is the reason why a lot of people want to reject objective beauty. And that is a moral objection here. And this pretty much flows in a way where if objective beauty is true, then that means some humans are more objectively beautiful than others. And that's a claim I think a lot of us don't really want to live in a world of. But is this really true? Well, maybe if you're a non-Christian objectivist, you might need to have this problem. But Christians, Christianity, the one big theological point of it is that it says all people are created in the image of God, making all humans intrinsically beautiful. And I think another thing that you can look at here is that, what happens if we go ahead and just accept the other viewpoint that what if subjective beauty is true? Well, if that's the case, then people's beauty comes completely from yourself. And this could be a big problem because then we'll start seeking relationships in a more self-centered way. So I think this is just something that you should remind yourself with, that just because beauty may be objective doesn't mean that you are less beautiful than someone else. In fact, the Bible seems to state that physical beauty is a very minute thing when compared to the spiritual beauty we behold. Alright, so what do we take from all this? Well, let's review some problems objective beauty seems to deal with poorly. The problem of perceiving beauty without positive feelings, problem of detail and cohesiveness seeming to be objective properties of beauty, and the one we really focused on being the conditions of subjectiveness doesn't seem to explain all of reality. With these problems, let's accept the alternative for now and see if that's really a problem for the Christian or atheist. So let's ask the question, why is there some type of objective beauty in reality? The Christian has a pretty easy time answering, as they could say the universe was made by a designer, or maybe a better way of putting it in this way would be an artist. And us image bearers can understand beauty as we're created in the image of God. Let's compare with how atheists would respond. And I would like to see some of your answers down in the comment section, as I'm probably not going to be able to address everything. But two I thought of myself would be possibly that it's a coincidence. What about the claim, the second one I have here, that some things would have to be more beautiful than others? Well, does this work? Well, I think even this line of reasoning doesn't work too well due to our abilities to create art, meaning we can also create bad art as well, as we went on slides earlier. Considering that almost every human intuitively would take a picture of space over even a very good artwork done by another person seems to also kind of debunk this position, as it seems like you would have a problem under your hands, as we just discussed, how the classic subjective argument that beauty is derived from experience doesn't work when it comes to things in space. Really, I think your best argument is to go ahead and say that somewhere in our genetics lies why we view pictures of space or microscopic pictures of things, we would never be able to see with the naked eye as beautiful. But I think most people here can see that this is a pretty ad hoc explanation, as it doesn't make sense if you pair this up with a genetical view derived from neo-Darwinistic evolution, which would encompass the survival condition of beauty, which we went over. Think about it. If you were to state that genetics makes up what we view to be beautiful, and then say that genetics is influenced by an evolutionary view that survival slowly shapes our genetics, then wouldn't animals that have been predators on our evolutionary tree for the longest time be viewed as ugly? It just doesn't add up, which is why I believe in this case, the Christian explanation for beauty is much better. Anyway, that is it for today. I know this was a longer video than the last, but I hope you guys took away something you haven't thought of before. And if there's anything you feel I didn't cover or did a poor job explaining in this topic, please feel free to write a comment about it, and I will hopefully address it. Alright, I hope you all have a great week, and God bless.